Panel on licensed comics. Beside me I'm Will, I'm your moderator for today. We've got Stephen Mooney here, who's worked on many, they can all talk about their individual projects as we go through them. Ben McCool, Nate Cosby, and Tommy Evans. So for those who don't know what a licensed comic is, these are basically the comics that are the bitchiest things to work on that you get given out in the most amount of ways. Now they're basically, they're the properties that you can come in and work on. Stephen, can I get the second mic? Actually, I'll do this one, yeah. Just want to go through the different projects you've worked on first.
Yeah, license-wise, I had mostly Angel for IDW, but I also did some CSI, some A-Team, The Mummy, a little bits of Doctor Who, and then Timo for Image. I think that, and more like... Oh, you missed out, my friend. Not the good Timo, not like they put Duncan Hoops. This was the emo Timo, the shirtless teenage boy version.
I love that. So I've worked on, Immortals with Mr. Nate Cosby here. He was the editor on the book, based on the big, flashy 3D movie. And that was a bit of an interesting one in that it was unusually for a licensed property based on a movie. It was deliberately not to be anything like the actual film. We were told to just go crazy with big logical characters, have no relation to the movie itself. So that was pretty interesting. And most recently, Nevsky for IDW, which is based on an old Sergei Eisenstein Russian propaganda movie. But I'll get to that shortly.
So when I was a Marvel editor, I actually ran the custom books, third-party licenses, which all the films, all the Marvel films, Iron Man, Captain America, everything tied in. BMW would come and say, hey, we want an 8-page comic or a 12-page comic, something like that. My favorite one that I did was Hulk and Iron Man in Sleepy's mattresses. That was awesome. I actually got whiteout Steve Lieber to draw a 4-page story based on Sleepy's mattresses starring Iron Man. Yeah, and since I left, Immortals, I edited Immortals. Jim Henson's a storyteller.
That's great.
Cheers. And currently doing Angry Birds for a Finnish company called Rodeo. So I do a lot of licensed stuff.
I think I've done more non-comics licensing than comics licensing. I've done lots of licensed type stuff for a lot of Star Wars stuff for prints and posters and books and like these encyclopedia things and children's books but as far as comics go, I've done Star Trek one, Starship Troopers, done lots of Star Wars covers. Last summer I did an interesting one that was related to the movie Super 8. So I did some stuff for the Super 8 movie, but then they did a promotional thing where J.J. Abrams wanted to do the backstory of how the alien stuff got to Earth or whatever. And so I drew this, I think it was like 8 pages or something. And that was at the very last frame, I had to draw the actual alien, or the monster. So, but they're so secretive about everything that that's something that we'll probably get into is the way that they are about, you got to figure out what's it look like so you can draw it. So with Lucasfilm, I built up enough of a relationship with them, or if I was working on that, or sometimes I would have some weird crossover, like I work on Batman Begins, but then there was bit of licensing stuff with that, or Harry Potter, or so I would already have it in, and I could get around the licensee. So if a company was doing Harry Potter stuff through Warner Brothers, I could kind of secretly get around them and actually get the reference I needed without having to go through all of the stuff that I know Nate loves to work with, all the approvals and. But with Super 8, they actually flew me and my daughter to LA rather than send me reference. They wanted us to actually sit there in the Bad Robot offices and go through the stuff with them. Part of it was so that they could, go through it and explain it well. But all I did was take pictures of the shit anyway. No, just kidding. But yeah, sometimes with that kind of the reference and all that stuff, that can sometimes be the hardest part. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, like over the course of a few days, you've heard about stuff like breaking in and things. We might just go straight to the nitty gritty on these ones and like the important questions. Like, Stephen, what was it like drawing teenage shirtless boys? No, I'm kidding. Shirtless boys.
And then getting paid.
And then getting paid.
Yeah.
I've done a few licensed comics myself, and one of the most annoying things can be licensors specific, or the actual actors themselves. There's like the specific things where certain characters you have to draw in a certain way, and a lot of times it depends on the actor. I'm just going to ask if you guys have any experiences that haven't been the best. Certain actors wanting different things changed. We got it from both sides. Like someone who's worked as the editor, we've got a few artists and writers here as well. So Stephen.
I've had a few. Nothing too terrible. The biggest one was who's the guy who plays Gil Grissom on CSI? William Peterson, is it?
Yeah.
He was very particular. Well, he's got a producer credit, I think, on the show, the whole franchise. So there's varying degrees of control. On the Angel books, it was Fox that had license approval as opposed to the actors themselves. So and most of them weren't aware of a lot of the comics anyway, so there was no real fussiness of that. But the people with more fingers in the pie, like William Peterson, sorry. While a lovely guy, he was very annoyed by the way I drew his visage. He thought I drew him very jowly. I was using whatever it was like season 11 or whatever CSI was on at that stage. This was my first American work, and I was. I didn't know that they actually could come back and say. I had to redraw nearly all the pictures of him in one of the issues of that book because he wanted to be drawn as the season 1 Grissom. He didn't want to be drawn as the current season Grissom.
Father Grissom.
I was glad to have the work, but I did. I was a little bit. I thought that was just a dumb thing. I was like, okay, I guess. So I made it a little more svelte, I guess. But other than that was my biggest example. Other than that, it's the same as everyone else. It's just the fact that reference becomes such a block on creativity in a way. The actors, it almost becomes a glorified photo album if you're not careful, which is very detrimental to the product, but yet so essential to the book because they want the people that own that are licensing the property want that to be recognizable to the punters, and you've got to find this laser-like teeny spot where you can make the characters move and act and tell a story in a believable, natural way and not look like they're just. In the Star or the Sun newspaper, you have these photo stories where there's 3 frames and Johnny is sleeping with Mary, and somebody's mother is entering the room. They're like, and the next one is, and it's so ridiculously overblown and over the top. That's what I found was the fine line. And now that's more interiors. Covers are not so bad, but the interiors, that would be my main bugbear. Still though, grateful for the work.
Yep. The thing about, for those of you that don't really know that much about licensed work, licensed work is done based on properties that already exist. Okay, so and I feel like we've all just sort of so far we've said things like, oh, you won't believe what I had to do.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, look what this guy wants now. The reason you take this work is because there's a certain amount of prestige. It's like someone calls you up and says, do you want to work on CSI or Teen Wolf?
Oh, Angel, I begged for Angel.
Or Angel, yes, it's a known property, Super 8. It's like that's a big time deal. It's produced by Steven Spielberg or J.J. Abrams involved. Like you want your name associated with that, and it's good to have that kind of credit, to a certain extent. When RKA came to me about Jim Henson's Storyteller, I said yes, knowing that you're not going to get that kind of. I grew up with that, so I will take whatever compromise is necessary to be able to work on the Storyteller. The reason you work on the licensed stuff is one of 2 reasons. One, it's a project that you grew up with or you currently love, and you just want to be involved with it because you have such passion for it. 2, you need money. And licensed properties tend to pay. There are some that pay very well, and they can get really popular and really talented artists like Mr. Somebody Evans, or you can get me to work on it if you don't have any money. But you go into a project like that you need to go into that project with your eyes open, understanding that you don't control this property. Whether you're the writer, the artist, the editor, the letterer, or that kind of thing, you're going to be dealing with a lot of people that work in the profession of creativity that have no idea what a comic book is. They have no idea how to make a comic. They have no idea what likeness is. If it doesn't look exactly like a screen capture of a CSI character, they're going to say it doesn't look like me. Well, but I know I'm using a pencil and you're using
A lot
human
of blood
flesh.
like that was,
Yeah.
why are all these lines on his face was my most common.
Yes. They don't understand. They don't understand line weight. They don't understand coloring. They don't understand lettering. They don't understand these things. Like, why is the balloon touching his head? It's like, well, because we only have so much space on Earth. We can't put the balloon off the page. But you know, you have to. I feel like my attitude towards licensed properties was crafted at Marvel when I took over these third-party things, because I was there right as Iron Man and Hulk and Iron Man 2 and Captain America, these things were starting to come up, and so Marvel was ramping up their licensed properties. And you start hearing all of these things from California that it needs to look like Robert Downey Jr., but we don't have permission to use his likeness, so it can't be Robert Downey Jr., but it shouldn't be the comic book. And so I hired John Romita Jr. to do a double-page spread that's going to show up in USA Today, and John Romita Jr. draws like John Romita Jr. And we hear from California is like, but why did he draw like this? Like, well, because he used his hand. He's John Romita Jr. Like that, you have to absorb these notes that are, a lot of times you cannot answer these notes, but you have to do your best to explain to them and make them happy, and ultimately realize that they're the customer and they're right and they're paying you, and you just have to do it. It's not your own property. You just have to bite the bullet to a certain extent.
I think the most unusual licensing job I took on was Nevsky that I mentioned previously, published by IDW. And unlike most licensed properties that are usually made on recent movies or TV shows or whatever's really, really hot, Alexander Nevsky, the movie came out in 1938, directed by Sergei Eisenstein, and it tells us the true-ish story of Alexander Nevsky and his army kicking the Teutonic Order out of Russia during the Christian Crusades back in the 13th century. So this movie is absolutely beloved back in Russia. Like Alexander Nevsky's, I think, in a poll, a fairly recent poll, he was voted the most prominent person in Russian history. So it's like, okay, I can't bollocks this, I really, really need to do a good job here. So I was talking to Moss Film, who owned the property, and also Trident Media, who own the US rights, a literary agency based in New York City. And they've never done comics before. They do mostly biographies, autobiographies. Like their clients include Snooki from the Jersey Shore, Jon Stewart and Paris Hilton. So it's just like, what am I doing here? But the movie in itself is fascinating in that it's basically a propaganda machine. It was released just as those pesky Nazis started making a nuisance of themselves in Europe. And so Joseph Stalin basically told the movie's director, okay then, we need to remind our population how much fun it is to kick Germans